Hi, this is Mrs. Nikki. Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology. Let's get right into Chapter 1. So here we have the definition of anatomy. We're going to look at anatomy and physiology, basic definitions, and then subdivisions. So anatomy is the study of structure of body parts and their relationship to one another. There are several subdivisions. When they say gross anatomy or macro, they mean large scale. So gross anatomy would be a cadaver dissection. Microscopic would be if we're going to look at cells that make up tissue underneath the microscope to get a better look at them. That's microscopic anatomy. And then developmental anatomy is if you're studying the growth of an embryo. So we won't talk about developmental or embryology until we get to the second half of anatomy and physiology. But basically, if you're going to study anatomy, you have to know the terminology and you have to be able to observe, manipulate, palpitate, and do auscultation. That's basically a fancy word for stethoscope use, right? To listen to the sounds of fluid as it's moving through the body, either air or blood, to touch something, to see something. So these are the basic tools that we're going to have to understand in order to understand anatomy and practice anatomy. So the next slide here we have physiology. This is how we study the function of the body parts. You have to understand the anatomy part in order to understand how the anatomy is contributing to the physiology. And we'll have some examples later on that we can point to directly. There are subdivisions in physiology based on the organ systems. We're going to look at 11 of these organ systems in just a moment, but think of, okay, your cardiovascular, so your heart and blood pumping through your blood vessels. That is a system or a subdivision of physiology. It behaves in a certain way, and we study cardiovascular, renal, lymphatic. We may not know what terms are yet, but we do know that there are several different physicians with many different specialties that relate to the physiology or working of the body. We're going to have to go back and study some chemical principles. We're going to have to talk about some basic physical principles as well, as how currents move, how ions move. So the next chapter we're going to cover some chemistry. Don't be too alarmed. We're going to learn just what we need to learn in order for some of these physiological functions of the body to make sense. So this principle of complementarity basically is saying that anatomy and physiology are inseparable. You can look at the anatomy of an organ and not understand how it works. You can look at a heart and see the chambers and see the vessels that lead in and out of the heart, but that doesn't tell you electrically how the heart is stimulated to pump blood. That would be the physiology part. But the tricky part is, in order for me to explain the physiology, you have to understand the anatomy or the structure, and they usually go hand in hand. So when we learn different tissue types, you'll realize that, okay, epithelial tissue usually absorbs and secretes or offers some sort of protection, so you're going to find that particular tissue type wherever you find those traits. So you'll see throughout the course how anatomy and physiology work together and that you can't really have one without the other. So here in this slide we see levels of structural organization. So the human body obviously is organized. We're going to start at the smallest chemical level and we're going to move all the way to the whole organism. So I have these highlighted in red. You do need to know the order of these structures. You have to understand not only the order but what they mean. So the smallest level of organization that we have is chemical. We have atoms and we have molecules that come together. We'll talk about this in more detail in Chapter 2. Cellular, now we're talking about the cells and their organelles. So I'll underline the word organelle because I want to make sure that you understand that organelles are compartments inside of cells. Next level we have up is tissue, then we have organs, then we have organ systems, then we have organisms. So maybe this picture will help a little bit more in your book. Shows you the figure at the chemical level. You see the atoms. Atoms come together and make molecules. Water is a molecule. Carbon dioxide is a molecule. These molecules then organize. We have organelles, and those organelles are inside cells. And then if we have several types of cells coming together, that forms tissue. And if we have several types of tissue coming together, that forms an organ. And then we have an organ system, and then we have an organism. So maybe this visual representation will help you a little bit more, but make sure that you can order these. If there was a test question about starting with the smallest or least complex level, What would that be? Chemical up to the organismal level, and that you have an idea what each of these mean. What is chemical? What is cellular? What is tissue? Okay, I have all of these highlighted because I think the requirements for life are pretty important, right? You have to be able to maintain a boundary. There's some sort of movement involved, responsiveness, digestion, metabolism, excretion, reproduction, and growth. I'm going to go over each of these in a little more detail. I just wanted to list them all for you so that you could see. So in preparing for the first exam, you would need to know these terms, know that they're all necessary life functions, but then be able to give me a sentence or two about each of these. So do you know maintaining boundaries is a necessary life function? Do you know what maintaining boundaries really means? Number one on our list here, maintaining a boundary. Basically, if you want to separate the internal from the external environment, your skin would be a great organismal example of this. So the entire human body is separated external versus internal via the skin. A plasma membrane is a boundary for cells. So a plasma membrane surrounds cells and creates a natural boundary. Number two here, movement or contractility. So we can move two things. We can move body parts or we can move substances. If we're going to move body parts, I have the words skeletal muscle in parentheses here. So in order to move your arm or your leg, you're going to contract skeletal muscles. If we talk about substances, or sometimes people refer to them as fluid, we're going to use cardiac and smooth muscle. So obviously cardiac is around your heart, and smooth muscle would be any sort of hollow tubing. So you need both cardiac and smooth in order to pump blood through your heart and your blood vessels. So this is the figure from the book. I wanted to show you an example of what a plasma membrane is. Here is the plasma membrane, and you can see it surrounds the cell. So if I go up here to this picture, this is an animal cell. It's this whitish structure that surrounds the outside of the cell, and it separates the internal from the external environment. We'll talk more about some of these other features that are here as we move through chapter 2 and 3. Number 3 here, responsiveness, the ability to sense and respond to stimulus. So first let's talk about what's a stimulus. If I put my hand in hot water, the temperature difference, the water being hot, is the stimulus. So if I'm cold, it would be the cold temperature is the stimulus. So we have to be able to respond to these stimuli in order to adapt or have balance. We'll talk about homeostatic balance in just a little bit. So the first example we have is a withdrawal reflex. If you place your hand in hot water, the hot water is the stimulus, and the message gets sent to your brain, and you decide, I'm going to pull my hand out of the water before it hurts me. You might also want to control your breathing or respond to needs in terms of breathing. So if you're running a marathon, you want to be able to get more oxygen in, so therefore you're going to increase your breathing rate. You're going to breathe in more deeply and breathe in more oxygen. Number 4 here is digestion. So in order to survive, we have to break down ingested, and they call it food stuff. So basically we're talking about glucose, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids. We have to take large food molecules like a hamburger and break them down into their simplest components and use those components to build molecules for ourselves. So here's the breakdown of foodstuff and then the absorption of the simple molecules into our bloodstream so that we can use them. So this brings us to a good point that we need to talk about something called cellular respiration. I'm going to come back and talk about cellular respiration in more detail, but just to get the basics, we have to take food and we have to breathe in oxygen. So this is the food that we eat. This is the oxygen that we breathe. We're going to break it down into water, carbon dioxide, and we're going to create energy. And this is the really important part. We're going to create energy, and it's stored in something that we call ATP. So we have to consume food, so we have to have digestion. Number 5 here, metabolism, all the reactions that occur in the body. An example of a reaction was the equation that I just showed you for cellular respiration. So metabolism is any time we're breaking down large molecules in order to have smaller molecules, or if we have smaller molecules and we're putting them together to make larger molecules. Number 6 here, excretion. So sometimes we want to remove the waste. If we eat too much and we don't need to store it all as fat or carbohydrates, then we're going to excrete it. We can do this either through urine or we can do it through feces. Imagine if you didn't ever take the trash out. It would build up, it would become toxic, your house would stink. It's the same thing when we talk about the organismal level. We have to be able to get rid of the unwanted products at some point. The last two, reproduction and growth, kind of go hand in hand. I wanted to show you this picture. It's from another textbook. But reproduction is for growth and repair. But then I have growth down here separately. Some books put these two together. So we're talking about the production of offspring in reproduction, but we're also talking about growth if we want to increase the size of a body part or an organism. So let's look how these two go hand in hand here. So first we have male and we have female, and they're going to create eggs and sperm, right? So this would be reproduction. Male and female come together, they create egg and sperm separately, the egg and sperm come together, and now we have fertilization. So these two became the zygote. Zygote is another word for fertilized egg. Now this one cell, this is only one cell, it has to grow up into an adolescent and then eventually has to grow into an adult. So if we're talking just growth, we're talking increasing the size of a body part or an organism, then we're talking about mitosis. If we're talking about producing offspring, we're now talking about meiosis. Please go ahead and look in your book and look at the difference between mitosis and meiosis. Basically, mitosis, if I damage my skin cells and I need to grow new skin cells, I'm going to use mitosis. So dividing a cell, an identical cell copies itself and you have another cell identical to the original. Meiosis is when we create egg and sperm, and these are the only times in a human body that meiosis occurs. We create egg and sperm, which are half of the DNA of the original organism. And this allows for the egg and sperm to come together to create one cell. And then again, that one cell has to go through mitosis to turn into an adolescent and eventually adult organism. So here are some examples if you'd like to see in more detail. Here, this is again from another textbook. I teach general biology. So here is a cell, and this cell, if you want to follow, it has these two longer chromosomes, and then it has these two shorter chromosomes. It has a total of 4 chromosomes. It doubles itself, and then it splits, but yet we have at the very end the exact same configuration that we had in the beginning. So we're talking identical copy. When we look at meiosis over here, meiosis, we start with 4, 2 of each, right? And then through this long meiosis 1 and 2 process, do you notice how there's only 2 chromosomes in each of these 4? So what did we do? We had 4, and now we're down to 2 in each. So this is not an exact copy. This is having the number, or taking, they call it a diploid organism, and turning it into a haploid organism. So we need to make sure that we understand that humans are multicellular. We're made up of many different types of cells. So the individual cells have to be kept alive. So we're designed, basically these organ systems are designed to serve the cells which are doing the work for the organism. There are 11 organ systems that all work together to help maintain life. So the first one that we're going to cover is in chapter 5. It's called the integumentary, and basically this is your skin. It's a fancy word for your skin. So chapter 5, we'll talk about some of the tissues that make up the skin. We'll talk about how vitamin D is synthesized. We'll talk about pain and pressure receptors. We'll talk about sweat and oil glands. The skeletal system, this will be Unit 3. Unit 3 will talk about all of the bones that make up the axial and appendicular skeleton. We'll talk about some of the joints, or how those bones are articulated, which means come together or join together. In Unit 4, we're going to talk about skeletal muscles. So skeletal muscles allow for movement or locomotion, facial expression. They help maintain our posture. And then this is the important part. We're going to talk about how muscles generate heat and has something to do with ATP, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The nervous system is the last unit that we're going to talk about in 201. So this includes the brain and the spinal cord, which is called your central nervous system. We'll also talk about your peripheral nervous system, or the outer part, the parts that come out here on the periphery. And we'll talk about how the nervous system basically conveys messages to and from the brain. The rest of these slides are going to be everything that we're going to talk about in 202. So in the second anatomy, we will cover the endocrine system, and the endocrine system has to do with hormones. So hormones that control growth, reproduction, water, insulin or glucose storage, adrenal glands, which release adrenaline. So we'll talk more about these. Thyroid, which has something to do with metabolism. The next system is called the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system includes the heart and the blood vessels, which transport blood. So remember, go back to the cellular respiration. What do we want to take in? We want to take in oxygen. What do we want to get rid of? We want to get rid of carbon dioxide. The next is called the lymphatic system. A lot of people just identify it with the term immunity. It is called the lymphatic system, but basically it's going to pick up any sort of fluid that leaks from the blood vessels, and you're going to clean it and return it to the blood. So inside these little lymph nodes here, the lymph nodes are going to have white blood cells, which are going to attack any foreign substances within the body before it returns the blood back to the blood vessels and to the heart. Respiratory system. This seems pretty easily recognizable, right? We have our lungs. We may or may not know the word bronchus. That's these tubes here and here that lead to our lungs. We have our trachea. We'll talk about our larynx and our pharynx. Basically, we're going to bring oxygen in, remove carbon dioxide. Digestive system. This was one of our necessary life functions, right? We're going to take food in through our oral canal, sometimes called our buccal cavity, and we're going to take it into our esophagus. It's going to go into our stomach here, then into our small intestines, and then our large intestines, and then any waste that needs to be eliminated is going to be eliminated as feces. The urinary system. We have our kidneys here. We have our ureters or ureters that deliver the urine to the bladder, and then we're going to have the urethra, which is the tubing that allows the urine to be expelled from the body. We can also see here, we'll come much later and talk about acid-base balance, but basically how to control what's in your bloodstream by getting rid of it through urine if we need to. Last, we have male and female reproductive systems. So basically, these are to produce offspring. So we're talking about meiosis. So the ovaries create eggs, the testes create sperm. This is the only place in the human body that meiosis occurs.